citizens of New Jersey is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and let me congratulate the new ranking member on his new position.
Take your time.
If the chairman lets me, I will. And thrilled to also now have him as a member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, which I just came from. So we look forward to seeing you there as well. Flooding is one of the most expensive and most frequent natural disasters in the United States. Despite this, just 4% of Americans have flood insurance. With climate change bringing heavier rainfall, stronger hurricanes, we need to ensure that flood insurance remains affordable and homeowners are financially protected. But last year, FEMA implemented a new premium methodology for the National Flood Insurance Program that will lead to higher premiums. The agency itself has estimated that premium increases will cause 1 million policyholders to drop coverage and therefore dilute this already small pool. And to make matters worse, there is little transparency about how FEMA is pricing the premiums, leaving the construction industry in the dark about how to optimally build flood-resistant homes. So, Dr. Deese, how have home builders been impacted by FEMA's new premium system, and what would be the long-term effects for coastal communities if flood insurance becomes too expensive?
Yeah, thank you for raising this issue, Senator. This is something you hear about from builders across the country in terms of not just the direct effect in terms of home buyers and their costs of higher insurance premiums, and clearly flood insurance is an important part of making sure that we can build housing in areas where you've got job creation and economic activity. But it's the uncertainty of how those premiums are calculated as a data person that's particularly concerning. How can you plan to do land development in an environment where that calculation is not known? In other words, the underlying equations. That makes it difficult to do land development. And I think it's really important to keep in mind that if you're talking about home building, that process is preceded by 3 to 5, in some cases 10 years of land development. So the uncertainty of it harms the land development process, which then harms the lot supply process, and then results in what we've talked about today, which is pricing out home buyers from the market, and it makes home ownership more expensive.
Yeah, and I would just note, if FEMA itself recognizes that it's going to lose 1 million policyholders, and insurance is about spreading risk across the widest base possible, you lose 1 million policyholders, that means the rates go up for everybody else. And then we have natural disasters in our states across the country, and the federal government comes and helps. Instead of having an insurance program that can mitigate as well as cover the cost, it doesn't make any sense to me. So that's why Senator Kennedy and I have introduced bipartisan legislation that will reauthorize the National Flood Insurance Program, keep premiums affordable, invest in cost-saving mitigation measures to put the program on a firm financial footing. And I look forward to working with the chairman and the ranking member on this critical issue. I am concerned about two things, as someone who's sat on this committee for quite some time. Affordable housing is increasingly located in areas that are away from job centers, forcing workers to pay higher transportation costs or work fewer hours. Thankfully, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act passed the last Congress, injected a much-needed $550 billion into reviving our nation's transportation systems. So, Dr. Herbert, how can we leverage the investments of IAGA to help connect affordable housing to good jobs, and how critical is it that we build more affordable housing near public transit so that we can connect people to good-paying jobs and careers?
Thank you for that question, Senator. It's absolutely critical that we have well-located housing near transportation systems. I believe in his opening remarks, Chairman Brown mentioned the importance of housing and transportation. We talk about not just a housing cost burden, but you have to add transportation costs, which come with that house, to the housing cost to understand how much people are burdened. So well-located housing can address housing affordability by reducing that overall burden. In terms of the Investment in Infrastructure and Jobs Act, my center recently did an analysis looking at the opportunities there to link that to housing. There's 3 ways. Much of that money is actually by formula, so it makes it difficult. But one is to provide technical assistance to state and localities to understand those connections. The second is to take advantage of the competitive grant programs to instill in those elements that require localities to get those grants to take into account housing. And then the third is to use for all the formula grant programs to try to build into those using existing tools, maybe through best practices or like, to make sure that states and localities understand how those investments can help.
Finally, the Urban Institute says that 16.1 million new household formations over the next 20 years, 80% of them will be senior households. Now, it seems to me that this increase in senior households is going to put a huge demand on senior public and assisted housing capacity and needs for the next Congress to consider. Do you see it that way as well?
Absolutely, Senator. In my written testimony, I talked about the increasing number of senior renters with worst-case housing needs. Since 2011, the baby boom generation started turning 65, and over that same last decade period, we've seen a 60% growth in senior renters who are either paying 50% of their housing or their income for housing or living in severely inadequate housing. And this is in many respects the tip of the iceberg as that older population, particularly people 75 and older, where the baby boom edge is just now, will continue to grow over time. So we're absolutely going to see an enormous increase in need among our most oldest residents.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks, Senator Menendez.